Okay, good morning everybody, and Hazak Baruch. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Tuesday morning as we are getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. And my friends, I would like to share with you today a masterpiece of an essay by Rabbi Gladstein in his book that I just purchased, The Mystery and the Majesty. We've quoted him a few times already. And I saw over here a chidush in this essay over here on Rosh Hashanah. And I mean, this is just a wow. Okay? When I say wow, I mean wow. You have to hear this, not so much even for, what does it mean to me and how does it help me? This is just something that, I don't know, you have to know it. It's just something that you need to know. It's just mind-boggling how he connects all of these different pieces and ideas from the different rabbis over the last thousands of years. And it's something that I pray that I can deliver with as much beauty and appreciation and enjoyment as when I read it myself. Okay? That is my only request to Hashem, to help me deliver it appropriately and to give you a taste of what I was able to experience. He begins over here, my friends. Of course, it has to do with Rosh Hashanah. So, Rosh Hashanah, we know that we read about the Akedah. Okay, we read about Akedat Yitzchak. Okay, just trying to adjust my camera. Okay, we read about Akedat Yitzchak. And the pasuk says, "Vayhi ahar hadevarim ha'eleh." If you have a Chumash, chapter 22, pasuk 1 in the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshit. My friends, let's follow along and go on an amazing journey together. Understanding exactly Akedat Yitzchak, God tested, the pasuk says, "Veha Elohim nisa et Avraham." And God tested Abraham. And the obvious question Tosafot asks right off the bat, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Hasid, is why is Akedat Yitzchak referred to as Avraham's test? Everyone knows it's Abraham's test. God tested Abraham. The truth is, it's as much a bigger test for Yitzchak as it is for Avraham. If anything, maybe bigger. We know that Yitzchak, according to our tradition, wasn't a kid at the time. How old was Yitzchak at the Akedah? According to our calculation, Yitzchak was 37. Okay? He was a mature adult. He had a choice to make. He could have just said, "Dad, I'm not going ahead with this. I'm out of here, man. Leave me alone, you crazy old man." But he didn't do that. Yitzchak went ahead with the Akedah. And that is very, very powerful. It's a test for him as well, no? Why is Yitzchak not given credit so much? It's really more Avraham. He had 10 tests. This was his 10th test. But again, isn't it maybe even harder for Yitzchak? Avraham, when it's all over, he's alive. He goes home. Yitzchak is dead. That's the test, to be dead. On a simple level, you could answer that actually this is an amazing lesson that we're all ready to die for Hashem, but how many of us are ready to live for Hashem? For Yitzchak to die, he doesn't have to live with the pain. He moves on. For him, the test is over. He goes to the next world. For Yitzchak, the pain is there forever. For Avraham, the pain is there forever. I was speaking to a parent the other day. He lost his child, and it's the craziest thing. It's the hardest test because it's a test that never ends. Every day you wake up and you look at that empty bed, that empty space in the house that was once filled by your child. It's the hardest test every single day. The kid who passed away, they're in Olam Haba. They're happy. They're with Hashem. If only they could come down and say to their parents, "Listen, don't cry. I'm here, I'm happy, I'm chilling." The deceased, they're in Olam Haba, they're having a fine time. It's the living that have to live with the guilt, that have to live with the pain. That's the real test. So that's why it's called the Nisa et Avraham. It's a test for Abraham, the one who will stay alive, much more than Yitzchak, who is going to die and the pain is just for a moment. But I'd like to share with you today another idea of why it's called Akedat Yitzchak. Why is it called the test of Abraham? Why is the tying of Yitzchak Abraham's test? Well, we move on and the pasuk says, Vayomer, God says to Abraham, Kahna et bincha, please take your son, Yehidecha, your only one, Asher ahavta, that you love, et Yitzchak, Isaac. And of course you notice the repetition. You notice that the pasuk seems to be giving too many details. Your son, the only one that you love, Isaac, just cut to the point. Take Isaac. Says Rashi that Hashem was trying to slowly bring Avraham into it. So as an example, God says to Abraham, take your son. Now Avraham had two sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael. So he says, which one? I have two. He says, Yehidecha, the only one. Avraham says they're both the only ones. Yitzchak's the only one from Sarah. Yishmael's the only one from Hagar. Hashem says, the one that you love. He says, I love them both. And finally God says, Yitzchak. And again, the question that we need to ask is, how could it be that Avraham thought for even a moment that Yishmael is the one that Hashem wanted him to sacrifice? You think about it, this is the test of history. Is it really Yishmael that's going to be the future? Is Yishmael the one that's going to be on the other side of this amazing test? How could Avraham even think it? If I'm Avraham, and God says, listen, I'm ready to do the test of a lifetime, and God says, take your son to kill him, I know right away it's Yitzchak. Yitzchak's the korban, Yitzchak's the tzaddik, Yitzchak's the sacrifice, Yitzchak's the one that could go on the altar, he's the kadosh. Yishmael, we just read that he was metzahek. Yishmael was playing around, fooling around, idolatry, adultery, you name it. And that's why, by the way, Avraham kicked out Yishmael from the house. Why did he kick him out? He kicked him out because he was a bad influence on Yitzchak. So how could it be that Avraham was even under the impression that it could possibly have been Yishmael, that God had to go and further clarify, no, not Yishmael, Yitzchak. Really, another question, I know it's not Pesach, but we're going to ask a lot of questions today. What does the Pasuk say? The Pasuk says, Vayashkem Avraham baboker, vayahavosh et hamoro, vayikach et shenen ne'arav eto, ve'et Yitzchak beno. He wakes up in the morning to go do the Akedah. He takes his son, Yitzchak, who's going to be the sacrifice, and he takes shenei ne'arav, the two lads. Rashi says, who were these two lads that accompanied Avraham? Besides Isaac. Who came with Avraham? Eliezer and Yishmael. So question one, why is he taking Yishmael to Akedat Yitzchak? Eliezer, I get it, it's his right-hand man, he's the guy that was always there. You need the guy there to protect you. But what's Yishmael doing here? And really, a much bigger question, what's Yishmael doing here at all? How is Yishmael even present? Remember, Avraham kicked him out. They banished Yishmael and Hagar from the house. Just before we read that Sarah says to Avraham, he's a bad influence, get him out of here. Avraham was a little hesitant. God said, whatever Sarah says, you must listen. And from then on, men have always listened to their wives, right? Okay, fine. And he kicks him out. And all of a sudden, he takes him to Akedat Yitzchak. How is he there? How is he present? He's all the way in Midbar Paran. He's all the way out in some desert somewhere. He moved on. They kicked him out. So Tosafot comes along and says something very interesting. You ever wondered, by the way, this question? Or no? Very, very interesting question. How is Yishmael there at the time of the Akedah? Wasn't he banished years before? Says Tosafot, yes he was. And he came back to visit. And it happened to be that he came back to visit the night before God appeared to Abraham in the dream and said to him, I want you to go do Akedat Yitzchak. And that's why, says Tosafot, Avraham said, 1 second. All these years, Yitzchak's the only kid in the house. All of a sudden, Yishmael comes back to visit for one night. And God comes to me tonight, on the night that Yishmael comes back and says, take your son and sacrifice him. So if you're Avraham, it's easy to understand now why he thought that it's possibly Yishmael that he's going to do a sacrifice. Because Yishmael just came back to visit, and what's the odds that God tells me tonight, when Yishmael's home to visit, that God says to me, come and sacrifice him. So that's why Avraham was under the impression that it's possibly Yishmael, and God has to say, no. The one that you love, Yitzchak. Okay. Explains Rabbi Gladstein. Right after the Akedah, the Torah says that a malach comes and he tells Avraham that after he passes the test, he says to him, good job, you passed. Ki barech avarechecha, I'm going to surely bless you. Veharbe arbe etzaracha, and I'm going to harba arbe etzaracha, I'm going to increase your offspring. Kechochevei hashamayim, like the stars, vekehol, and like the sand. Veirash zaracha et sha'ar oyevav, and your offspring will inherit the gate of his enemy. Now, when we say the gate of his enemy, who is this oyev that the pasuk refers to? When the pasuk says that you'll inherit the gates of your enemy, in Hebrew, there's two ways to say, by the way, enemy. What's the other way? Oyev and? Anyone know? How else do you say an enemy? An oyev and a soneh. Okay, a hater. What's the difference between a hater and an oyev? Which one's worse? Worse is oyev. Oyev comes from the word oy vavoy. Oyev. Oy, 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 right? So oyev is much worse. You see, when a soneh hates you, but even when he's oppressing you, even though he's vicious, there's sometimes that he could act with mercy, with rahmanut. But an oyev is cruel from beginning to end with no mercy. No mercy! Cobra Kai style, right? No mercy. No, any karate fans? Fine. So, says Rabbi Gladstein over here, he says something, I don't know, I got used to saying that, right? He says over here something beautiful. When we refer to soneh and oyev, we know that as a Jewish nation, we've had primarily two enemies historically. We've had Esav and we've had Yishmael. Which one is the soneh? Which one's the oyev? Well, we know when it comes to Esav, the pasuk says, remember the halacha she'esav soneh leYaakov. When Yaakov Avinu encounters Esav, our rabbis say it's a known thing that Esav hates Yaakov. Soneh. Esav is the soneh, but there's one thing worse than a soneh, and that is an oyev. An oyev really is referring over here to Yishmael. And Hashem is promising Yitzchak that he will conquer the gates of Sone'av, of his enemy, of Oyevav, of his enemy, of Yishmael. And on the way to the Akedah, our rabbis tell us that Yishmael was arguing with Eliezer. They said, Avraham is going to kill Yitzchak. Let's fight over the inheritance. I'll play you for it. And Yishmael started saying, I'm going to inherit. And Eliezer said, no, not you, it's going to be me. And Hashem says back, Ve'yirash zaracha et sha'ar oyevav. That Yitzchak will actually be the one that's going to overpower his oyev, his enemy Yishmael. The pasuk says, Vayhi ahar hadevarim ha'eleh. And Hashem commanded him on the Akedah after these events. After what events? Vahi ahar hadevarim ha'eleh. Well, Rashi tells us the following argument took place between Yitzchak and Yishmael. Take a look, my friends. Rashi says that when Avraham does the Brit Milah for him, Avraham was 99. How old was his son? Yishmael was 13. And how old was, right? How old was Yitzchak when he got a Brit Milah? Yitzchak was a young kid, like the pasuk says. He got a Brit Milah like everyone at 8 days old. So the following conversation now happens. Yitzchak and Yishmael both have a Brit Milah, but whose Brit Milah is greater? Yitzchak's or Yishmael? If you're honest, you know that Yishmael's Brit Milah is much greater, because Yishmael, and this is what he says to Yitzchak, he says, I willingly did this Milah at 13. I could have ran away. I chose a Brit Milah. You didn't have a choice. Which 8-year-old kid has a say in the matter? 8-day-old kid, 8 days old, no one's asking you. They're doing the Brit Milah for the kid. He didn't choose. So Yishmael says, I'm really the correct heir for the throne of Avraham. I'm deserving to continue because I chose the Brit Milah. You never chose it. And it's a mitzvah that you could only do once in your life. You can't do a second Brit Milah. Right? You could shake lulav twice. You can wear 2 tzitzits. You can't do another bris, right? There's only one. So he says to Yitzchak, you lost out. I am the real heir. I have a Brit Milah that was chosen by me. And what does Yitzchak, what does he say back? So Yitzchak says, you think I'm afraid with one limb that you sacrificed? I'm ready to sacrifice my whole body for Hashem. And it was right after that conversation that God says to Yitzchak, yeah? You ready to sacrifice your whole body for me? Prove it. Let's see. God tells Avraham, Kachna et pincha, idecha, take your son Yitzchak. I want him to put his money where his mouth is. Now, by the way, we understand why it's called Abraham's test. Why is it not Yitzchak's test? Because Yitzchak didn't need to be tested. Yitzchak promised, he committed, he said, I'm ready to kill myself for Hashem. So it wasn't really a test. It was just really him fulfilling his promise. He said, I'm ready to die for God. You did a Brit Milah for God, I'll die for God. But Avraham never promised. Avraham never said such a thing. So it's really Abraham's test. And this is how Rashi explains Vayhi ahar hadevarim ha'eleh, the words. And it was right after these events transpired. Only problem with Rashi is that it doesn't fit the text. If you open the Chumash, the conversation between Yitzchak and Yishmael, it happens when they were younger. Then there's a whole paragraph right there following that conversation that deals with nothing to do with the Akedah. It has to do with Avimelech and his general and Avraham, and they have this whole argument of it's my place, it's your place, why didn't you tell me? And it's your wife, I didn't know. And they make a peace treaty. This is a seemingly unrelated episode that means nothing, it matters nothing. If the Torah deleted it, no one would even notice. The question is, what's it doing here? Why is the episode of Avimelech in between the psukim of Yishmael fighting with Yitzchak and the Vayhi ahar hadevarim ha'eleh of the Akedat Yitzchak? If it's true that Akedat Yitzchak was a response to the convo, it should have been written right after the convo. But Hashem over here, he sticks in another unrelated event of Avimelech. So we have over here a lot of questions, and I know it seems a little confusing, but I think it's all going to come together. Watch this. The Pasuk says, we read a little further. They move on to the Akedah, and the Pasuk tells us, Pasuk 4, that Vayar et hamakom merachok. Avraham sees the makom, the place, from afar. What place? What place did he see from far? Really, Hashem didn't tell him where to go. He says, just go, I'll show you. So he didn't know where to go. There was no ETA. You plug in the ETA. Avraham didn't have an ETA. He didn't have a destination. He didn't know. He was just going. He didn't know what time he's going to get there. He didn't know where's there. All of a sudden, the Pasuk says that he saw it from far. What did he see? What place? Hashem didn't tell him what place. He saw, our rabbis tell us, he saw the Shekhinah. He sees the presence of God. And at that moment, he turns to Yitzchak. He says, do you see what I see? And Yitzchak says, yes, of course. I see the mountain. It's covered with a cloud with Hashem's glory. And then he turns to the other two lads and he says, do you see what I see? And Eliezer and Yishmael say, what are you talking about? What should we see? We see the mountain, Dad. Avraham says, you don't see the Shekhinah? And they say, no, we don't see a Shekhinah. We don't see anything. We just see that mountain over there. And Avraham replies, Shevu lachem po im hamor. Well, if that's the case, I see that you have a lot in common with this hamor, with this donkey. You see, a donkey sometimes will wind up on Har HaBayit. It could wind up in the land of Israel if it happens to just cross and end up there. But the donkey never intended to wind up on Har HaBayit. Says Avraham to Yishmael, maybe here and there you'll have a presence in the land of Israel, but it's no different than a hamor. It's physical in nature, and there's zero spirituality. There's no level of spirituality in that connection that you have to the land of Israel. At times the donkey is on the mountain. But it didn't know, it didn't intend. Your connection with Jerusalem, with Har HaBayit. Avraham said this to Yishmael, by the way, thousands of years ago. I mean, talk about current events, right? Avraham says to Yishmael, your relationship to Har HaBayit is completely physical and temporary in nature, no different than a donkey. But one second, what about the zechut of the Brit Milah? The fact that he was 13 and he chose to do it, doesn't that count for something? Shouldn't that give him a right to the land of Israel? And that is why, right after that conversation with Yitzchak and Ishmael fighting over the land of Israel and the inheritance of Abraham, because what are they fighting over after all? They're fighting over Israel. They're fighting over the rights to continue the legacy of Abraham. Included in that is the land of Eretz Yisrael. And right after that conversation, Hashem brings the story of Avimelech. What do we know about Avimelech? We know that the Pelishtim, this is beautiful right here. Pelishtim, whenever the Pelishtim are mentioned, they're always mentioned and there's always one word that's always used with Pelishtim, with the Philistines. And he brings a few proofs over here that the one word that's always connected to Pelishtim is Ariel. Ariel is uncircumcised. Pelishtim are known to be uncircumcised. It's found in a few places, in Shoftim, in Shmuel, in Divrei Hayamim, and the Pasuk on purpose mentions how Avimelech, a Pelishti, lives in Israel. And you know what the Pasuk's trying to say, says Rabbi Gladstein? Pasuk's saying, you, Yishmael, are trying to have a claim on the land of Israel because you are circumcised? Israel has nothing to do with circumcision. My proof? Look at Avimelech. He's here. He lives in Israel, and he's a Pelishti. They're as uncircumcised as it gets. They're the epitome of Ariel. And therefore, he has land in Israel. He has a piece. So acquiring a piece of the land has nothing to do with whether or not you're circumcised. Your argument, like we say in the Gemara language, it's a haluk. That's not mehalek. You're giving an answer that doesn't really divide. Doesn't matter. That answer. Your argument that I'm circumcised doesn't play, doesn't hold in this question, in this specific trial. So Avraham, he now has to bring Yishmael, and he's got to show him. You guys are fighting over who's the right heir. It's Yitzchak. Ve'yirash et sha'ar oyevav. And Yishmael, the fact that you chose circumcision means nothing. And he literally has to bring Yishmael to the Akedah to show him, look, it's Yitzchak and not you. By the way, you should know the Arabs, in their version of this story, in the Quran, not that I'm an expert in the Quran, trust me, I never read it, just what it says here. Just in case, oh wow, Rabbi Miz read the Quran. No, don't worry, I didn't read it. It says it here. One day maybe when I finish Shas, I'll get to the Quran. Let me finish our own books first. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh baro. But in their version, it says that the Akedah was with Yishmael. Okay? And the Arabs, they don't change it. The Christians, they don't change it. The Christians, they have Akedat Yitzchak. The Arabs tamper, because they know this is a very important moment in history. And Avraham brings Yishmael to show it's Yitzchak and it's not you. Now, I just have a question. Was it not enough that Avraham kicked Yishmael out? Why did God bring Yishmael the night before on purpose so that he could accompany them the next morning to the Akedah to show Yishmael, look, by the way, you are zero, you have no rights to the land of Israel? Why do you have to go all out of his way to show Yishmael? I mean, the fact that Avraham kicked him out of the house is enough of a proof. But really, I know some of you are thinking this, there's no proof over there. Because really, Avraham didn't want to kick Yishmael out. Remember when we studied it a few minutes ago, it was really Sarah's choice to kick him out. Sarah said Avraham didn't want to. So God knew this is going to be a big problem. If you don't outwardly, explicitly reject Yishmael, people are going to be under the assumption that it wasn't your choice and that you weren't, in sync with this idea. So he had to deliberately bring back Yishmael for the night so that Avraham could show actively, I want you to do nothing with the inheritance. Okay, so this is really powerful stuff over here. But my friends, this is where the fireworks begins. Okay? So is everyone with me? We have a story. We have Hagar. She gives birth to Yishmael. Yishmael is now causing problems. Avraham kicks him out. But that wasn't enough of a rejection. So God orchestrates that he comes back the night of the Akedah so that he could accompany them, so that God could show him, look, Yitzchak is the heir, Yishmael you are not. The fact that you have a Brit Milah means nothing. And the proof is that we have Avimelech who lives in Israel and he also doesn't have a Brit Milah. And therefore, that's why it's in between the story. To show you that it means nothing with the rights to Israel. And that's why I'm choosing Yitzchak. The fact that you have a Brit Milah is not one-upping Yitzchak. Okay. After Hagar conceives with Yishmael, let's come back to that story. Avraham and Sarah can't have a child. So listen well. Sarah takes her maidservant, a surrogate really is what it is, and she says to Avraham, here is my maidservant, and ulai ibane mimena, maybe I could build through her. A surrogate. So take her and I'll build through her. So Hagar conceives, and her job is really to have the baby and hand it over to Sarah. But what happens? When Hagar conceives, she starts getting very arrogant. The Pasuk says, Vatere ki harata, she saw that she conceived, Vatekal gevirta be'eneha. Her mistress Sarah was lowered in her eyes. You could imagine Hagar, after she conceives, she now feels like she's in the driver's seat. She starts saying to Sarah, Rashi says, she starts saying to her, oh wow, look at that. One night and it worked. I wonder what that says about you, Sarah. What does that say about you? All these years, you and your Tehillim and covering your hair, trying to conceive. You're a faker, Sarah. God doesn't want you to conceive because you're not really as righteous as you make it look. I'm the righteous one. I'm the tzaddiket. And she started talking down to Sarah. Now, she's forgetting her place. Sarah is the gevirta. She's getting very way ahead of herself. She's completely becoming very full of herself, very arrogant. And really, Sarah was very hurt. She turns to Avraham. She says, Avraham, you hear her saying all these things and you do nothing. Hamasi alecha. My outrage, Abraham, is against you. You're my husband. You should defend me. And Avraham says back, Hineshif hatech beyadech. Asila hatov be'enai. She's yours. Do whatever you want. I'm behind you, honey. And the Pasuk says, V'te'aneha Sarai. Sarai starts dealing harshly with her. She starts afflicting her. She starts insulting her. She starts causing Hagar pain. Now you should know the Ramban, Nachmanides, says this was a mistake on Sarah's part. She shouldn't have done this. She went too far by torturing Hagar. It was the wrong move. And because of that, till today, says the Ramban, the Jews are suffering. The children of Sarah are suffering from the children of Hagar. Till today, you want to know why Yishmael is killing us? It's really a punishment for how Sarah was torturing Hagar. That's the Ramban's opinion. However, it's important to mention that there are many commentaries that completely argue with the Ramban, and they say that he's completely wrong over here. Because really, and this is the Riva and others, they suggest that Sarah was completely justified. You know, the halacha, the idea over here that Hagar is becoming arrogant. Sarah realizes she has to put her back in her place. So she humiliates her to remind her, you're not the boss in this relationship. Don't forget your place. And she was completely in line to take revenge in this scenario. That's what many commentaries hold. Now, I have to share with you something that's found in the writings of the Chidah. Chidah Rabbi Hayim Yosef David Azulai. He has a book that he writes about the history of all of the great sages great sages of history, and he tells us about Rabbi Yaakov Skili, a Talmid of the Rashba. The Rashba was a Rishon, a medieval scholar. Here the Talmid Rav Yaakov Skili. And he writes over there the following documented story that took place with a man by the name of Yishai. Anyone know Yishai? Let me tell you about Yishai. Jesse. Yishai was Ruth's grandson, right? Boaz had a son Oved, right? Did I skip one? Oved, Yishai, David. Okay? So listen to this. Yishai comes from Ruth. Now, the halakha was that Ruth being in Moaviyah, the halakha according to Shemuel Hanavi was that she's permitted to convert. It's only the males that are banned. However, this was a big point of contention, and there was a fellow Doeg in the times of Yishai who was causing problems, and Yishai was worried that his first 6 kids that he had with his wife would have been maybe questionable as far as Jewish identity is concerned, because their grandmother is Ruth. So what does Jesse do? Yishai, he decides that night he has a plan. Halachic loophole, you ready? He calls over his maidservant. He says to her, listen, all the kids that I have with my real wife, one day they may become pasul, invalid. I have an idea. Let us conceive, and if a shivcha, you, a maidservant, has a child, your child is a slave, and if we free him, he has 0 ties to his ancestry. And he, even if he comes from Moab, will be clean. It's a halachic loophole that even if you're from Moab, so he decides to conceive with his maidservant. The maidservant, who is very loyal to her mistress, Yishai's wife, she calls her over and she says, listen, this is what Yishai plans on doing tonight. So the mistress, the real wife, she dresses as the maidservant. It's a crazy story. She dresses as the maidservant and she goes into the room and she's with her own husband without her husband knowing that it's her. Crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. Yes, this is amazing period. Watch this. The mother, the real wife of Yishai, all of a sudden she's pregnant. She conceives. And Yishai's like, how are you pregnant? I wasn't with you. You see, he didn't know it was her. And she didn't spill the beans. All of a sudden, everyone starts calling this baby that's being born a mamzer. It's from cheating. It's adultery. This child is completely out. The brothers threw him into the lions, then they threw him to the dogs. Hashem, of course, comes and he keeps David alive. However, this is really crazy stuff over here. The pasuk says, Hatzila meherev nafshi miyad kelev yehidati. Rescue my soul from the sword, my essence from the grip of the dog. The David writes in Tehillim, Muzar hayiti le'ahai. I was a stranger to my brothers. Really, what he was saying was, I'm a mamzer to my brothers. Everyone in the family thought David was a complete mamzer. Okay? And he has 0 halachic status, anything. 0. When was the smoke slightly cleared? When Shmuel comes to anoint a king, Yishai brings his 6 sons. Shmuel's like, it's none of them. He's like, well, there's no one else. He's like, there's got to be someone else, man. And finally, Yishai's like, oh, there's actually one more kid, but it can't be him. He's a mamzer. And he says, just bring him. And David walks into the room. The 7th kid that was born between Yishai and his own wife was David HaMelech. And everyone thought David was a mamzer. And finally, David comes in, and the oil rises, and Shmuel rises, and everyone at that point realized, oh, maybe there's some truth over here to the story that we didn't know before. And my friends, this is where the chidah comes in. You ready? Says the chidah, if you ask me, this maidservant of Yishai was a gilgul for another maidservant in history. A gilgul of Hagar. And the same way Hagar mistreated her mistress, her tikkun, she had to fix that. She comes back as this maidservant to do a tikkun by respecting her mistress. And this time, instead of having a child with Yishai, she has to say to her mistress, he's yours, go ahead. And she rectifies the arrogance that Hagar had towards Sarah. Now listen to this. The Zohar tells us that the final galut, at the end of time, we're going to have to fight off two enemies, a soneh and an oyev. The Zohar says we're going to have to fight off Esav and we're going to have to fight off Yishmael. Esav is referred to in the pasuk as parim abirim. Okay, this is a pasuk. This is referred to in Sifra Detniuta. Esav is referred to parim abirim, a mighty ox. Yishmael, which animal is Yishmael? If Esav's the ox, then Yishmael is the chamor. We just saw it. Avraham says to Yishmael, Shevu lachem po im hamor. Sit here with the hamor. Sit with the donkey. So Esav's the ox, and Yishmael's the donkey. Watch this. The pasuk says that when you're plowing, lo taharosh beshor, you can't plow with a shor, ubahamor yahdav, and with a donkey together. The Zohar says because when you put a donkey and an ox, you're combining the forces of Esav and Yishmael against the Jewish people. We can't put them together. We have to make sure they stay separate. We could tackle and fight each one alone, but not together. Now, if that's the case, says the Zohar, that's why we have two Mashiach. We have Mashiach ben Yosef, and Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben Yosef, Yosef HaTzadik, is known to be, which animal is represented by Yosef? Yosef is a shor. Pasuk says, Bechor shoro hadar lo. And if that's the case, Yosef, you need Yosef to fight Esav, who is also a shor. You fight fire with fire. You fight an ox with an ox. But then you need Mashiach ben David. And his job is to take care of Yishmael. We know that David is Ani verochev ala hamor. Mashiach David is going to be coming on a donkey. Because why is he coming on a donkey, not on a horse? Because by being on a donkey, he's going to defend us against the enemy of the donkey, the enemy of Yishmael. And that's why it's very important that we cannot combine these two animals when we're plowing. And that's why the Zohar says we need two Mashiachs. Why do we have two Mashiach? We have one Mashiach, Mashiach ben David. No, because you have two enemies that you have to get rid of. And each general is going to take care of another enemy. My friends, if this is all true, we must ask one final question. Crazy. Hagar, she sins by, making fun of Sarah. And she needs a tikkun for that. So her tikkun is by coming down again as the maidservant of Yishai and respecting her mistress. But we have to ask really a bigger question. Aside for hurting Sarah, Hagar did a much worse thing. It's true she hurt Sarah, but she also gave birth to our biggest enemy in history. She gave birth to Yishmael. What about fixing that? Is there no tikkun for giving birth to Yishmael? The answer is, when she comes back again as the mistress, who does Yishai's wife give birth to that night? She gives birth to David, the remedy who's going to fight off against Yishmael. So the tikkun is happening in many, many different layers, many different levels. The Gemara tells us in the end of Masechet Makot that when Rabbi Akiva witnessed the destruction of the temple, he was walking with his friends on Har HaBayit. He was walking with his friends on the mountain of the Temple Mount. And it says that they saw a shu'alim, they saw foxes. And all of the rabbis started crying, and Rabbi Akiva started laughing. And the rabbis were crying because it says, Hazar HaKarev Yumat, if a stranger enters, he will die. And all of a sudden now there's foxes walking around. And Rabbi Akiva laughs. He says, no, I'm laughing because it's a good thing if they're there. And what exactly is going on over here? And Rabbi Gladstein quotes the Rama Mifano. The Rama Mifano, Rav Binyamin Vitali. He writes in his Sefer Alon Bachut. Do you know who the foxes are? Shu'alim, write it out. Shu'alim, let's play Wordle. Take the word Shu'alim and unscramble the letters. What do you get? Foxes. Unscramble Shu'alim. and you get Yishmael. The rabbi saw that there's going to be Yishmael right here. There's going to be this mosque. There's going to be Yishmael on Har HaBayit. And they couldn't handle that. They started crying. And Rabbi Akiva says, don't worry, because the same way the Pasuk says that there will be foxes, the Pasuk also promises that one day Mashiach will come and get rid of the foxes. Mashiach ben David is going to come and get rid of Yishmael. So this is a promise, my friends, that we have already in so much of our literature. Look how rich, look how this one story of Akedat Yitzchak, you read it now, it has completely different meaning. We should be zocher very soon, my friends, to the days that we see how Yishmael will be removed. Mashiach will come and get rid of our oyev, get rid of our soneh, b'mehera b'yameinu, amen. We'll stop over here. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.